Hi, everyone. Thanks, Stephanie, for the introduction, and thanks for organizing this magnificent event. And everybody who supports this is beautiful. As Stephanie said, I want to talk about why do we love films. And I mean, it's sort of like, probably everybody, there's some people probably say, oh, I hate going to the cinema. But I mean, it's rare you find somebody who's never really enjoyed watching a film. And if we take a step back, it's a bit of an odd thing. I mean, if you had an alien landing in your backyard and saying to you, what do you like to do on the weekend? And you say, well, I'm going to the cinema. And the alien says, well, what's that? And you say, well, I go to this thing and I pay a lot of money and then I pay more money to drink a lot of sugary drinks and eat a lot of sugary food. And I sit down in a very dark room with a bunch of strangers I've never seen before, and we stare at a screen for 2 hours. And the alien would say, well, that's a bit daft, isn't it? And really, why do we do that and why do we like it so much? Well, I think the reason we're doing it is because films provide us with certain truths that are as strong or stronger than what reality gives us. And it's sort of like, if you think about it, it's sort of like an add-on to life. Like almost like your life is a big bubble, and films sort of like enlarge that bubble a little bit. And I'll try to talk about how that works and why I think it's great. But first, let's talk a little bit about what I mean by reality and truth, so we're all clear on that, because for the sake of this speech. So reality is really what philosophers call ontological truth, which means that, like, this wall is white, or we are on the 39th floor of Canada Square One. So we can all agree on that. But on the other hand, there's something like a truth. And what I mean by that is, well, I think it's, even though it's quite overcast, it's quite the warm day today. But my friend Joanna from Rio de Janeiro probably thinks it's really cold outside today. And both of these things are true. It's true for her. One thing is true for her, the other thing is true for me. Well, I personally think that truth are much more important for our well-being and how we feel than reality. And films deal very much with truth. And let's look at how films deal with truth and what they do with us. And in order to do that, I want to talk about two sort of very typical film tools and show you how they work. The first one is dramatic irony. So dramatic irony is not exclusive to film. It's been around for 2,000 years. Aristotle was a big fan. And it's really been invented in ancient Greece. And the most classical case of dramatic irony, most of you know, is probably from a play by Sophocles called Oedipus Rex, the King Oedipus, where Oedipus eventually ends up killing his father, and he doesn't know that, but we know it's his father, and we also know something really bad is going to happen to him. Now, what's a good example for dramatic irony in filmmaking? Well, a really, really good example for dramatic irony in filmmaking is John Carpenter's Halloween. Who has seen John Carpenter's Halloween? Anybody knows what I'm talking about? Horror film from the 80s? Okay, at least a couple of people. So what this film is about, what we see in the first 25 minutes, and it's really absolute brilliance if you want to experience dramatic irony at its best. You see very young Jamie Lee Curtis in her first Hollywood role, walking the streets of sort of suburbia in the 80s in the US, and it's all very harmonious. You know, she's a very bright girl, very sort of mature, but really she only cares about like her homework and what her friends are doing, sort of the neighbor's boy, all these things, and pretty good life. All the while, Mike Myers, a mass murderer, is running around plotting to kill her. And we know that, but Jamie Lee Curtis doesn't know that, because we have seen before that he's been killing his parents, he broke out of prison, etc. We even see him stepping into the frame, watching her. She doesn't know that, of course. So that's dramatic irony, or an example of dramatic irony. What does that do? Well, two things. First, of course, it creates suspense. It's terribly exciting. But there's another thing, and that is it creates what I call a silent contract between the audience. So because if I'm sitting in the cinema and watching Halloween in 1983 or 85, Dave, who sits 2 rows in front of me with his girlfriend, who I've never met, I've never talked to, I don't even know that he's here. He doesn't know me either. We both now have something in common. We both know more than Jamie Lee Curtis' character on screen, and that binds us together. That's a silent contract. And as such, the experience we're having suddenly is a collective experience. It's an experience we're having together with everybody in the room. Let's look at something else, which is the most typical film tool, editing, which is really the unique to filmmaking, and it's incredibly powerful. And editing really works with first, it works with one fact, is that images are very evocative. Give you an example, very evocative image. So, but editing goes a step further. Editing doesn't only show images like photography, it uses another parameter, the parameter of time, and it puts images into a sequence. So I'll show you how that works. I try to, without showing you a film. So here's the image again, and here's another image. So what are most of you thinking now? Is he smiling? Or this is probably going to go wrong. So let's give you another example. Same dude smiling. And then same image, just a little bit zoomed out. So what are most of you thinking? Like, thanks God he's in a pool. Or maybe those pools are adjacent and he's still smiling at him or something. So let's take a step back and see what happened here. So two things. Once you put images into a sequence, your brain just can't help itself. It has to make some sort of logic out of it. So if I show you a close-up of an eye and then a roaring lion, your brain just has to put a meaning into that. It has to contextualize. And two things happen during that. First, it's an incredibly impulsive moment. You don't use the faculty of understanding. You don't analyze. You immediately have a reaction, and that just happened to all of you. And the second thing is, it's an incredibly personal moment because, well, I told you later, but I didn't write about, like, tell you what to think about this. You all had an immediate reaction, and you thought it yourself. You didn't talk to your friend, the person you're sitting next to. You all had that reaction. And in the end, most of us had a similar reaction, so it's also a collective experience. And this is really what makes the experience of watching a film so outrageous and so outstanding, that it's a collective experience, and at the same time, it's an intimate and a very personal event. And that's something which very rarely happens. And when these come together, what really happens is that we experience a moment that is a truth, that feels true, and as such, it becomes part of our life. So if we look in the wider picture, a good film can become part of your story or part of your truth. To stick with the example, after you've seen Jaws, swimming in the open water probably feels different than it feels before, because you have been scared sitting in the cinema watching Jaws, probably. Maybe you hate Steven Spielberg, but probably you have been very scared. So in this sense, that experience has become part of your life, and it feels almost as true as if you really experienced something like it. Well, Jaws is a really good example because it's an incredibly well-crafted film. And at the center of that, when a really good film comes together and it becomes part of your story, part of your truth, so you will never sort of forget it, and always sort of like a dream, always think, did that really happen, or did I see that on the movie, or did I dream that? At the center of that, when that happens, is something we call staging, which is really what a director does, which is really always people's, what does a director actually do? Just shout at people. No, he actually, when he's good, he does some really good staging. And I give you an example how staging works, which sort of sums up, I think, what's great about films. And it's from one of my favorite films, which is a film from a French director called Max Ophuls. And he shot that film in 1948. It's a very classic black and white movie. And he had emigrated to Hollywood at that point, like many of his peers. And the film is called A Letter from an Unknown Woman. And it's based on a book with a similar title by Stefan Zweig, an Austrian writer, which some of you might know. And to cut sort of a long story short, the film is about a young girl that falls in love with a much older man, and she sort of meets him. He moves away to another city. She meets him again. They fall in love. He moves away again. It's a tragedy. So they never really come together. And it's very sad in the end. But in the middle of the film, there's sort of a short time when they're age appropriate to actually go out with each other. And they're having a wonderful time. It's beautiful. And there's a scene in the middle of the film where they're sitting in a train carriage. And the camera sort of profiled wide shot of both of them. And they're talking. They're really in love with each other, you can see. And in the background, we see the train is passing by the skyline of Venice. And suddenly the train stops. And the man says to the woman, well, where do you want to go next? And she says, what about Switzerland? And he says, well, Switzerland it is. And he gets up, and he gets out of the train. And he walks alongside the train. And suddenly arrives at a little sort of ticket box. And there's an old lady sitting there with lots of scarves. And she's like, seems to be very, very cold. And she says, are you and the lady enjoying the ride? He says, yes. Can we have Switzerland, please? And he gives her a ticket. gives her a bill, sorry. And she takes the bill and she turns around and she yells, "Switzerland!" And the camera cuts to an old man on a bike. And he's holding a steaming mug of coffee. He's taking a big gulp and he pulls a big lever. The camera pans left and we see a big canvas with the skyline of Venice suddenly pulling up, and behind it appearing a big canvas with the Swiss Alps. And the man takes a whistle, whistles twice, toot, toot, and starts pedaling on his bike, and the canvas starts moving behind the train. The man returns to the carriage, and we see the couple continuing their journey, and equally in love, equally enjoying their ride. Now, what's great about this scene, like many, many great scenes in filmmaking, is that Ophuls, of course, talks about movies itself. It's a film about films. It's a scene about films, sorry. And there are two things here. One, of course, this couple, they know it's not Venice. They know it's not the Swiss Alps. But they're having a collective experience, which is at the same time very intimate, very personal. And they decide that this is their truth right now. They're going on this journey together. But there's one more important point, which is that we as the audience, I mean, it's clearly, if you watch the film, it's clearly a drawing of Venice. If I show you this right now, you're like, that's not Venice, that's a drawing of Venice. But the acting and the staging in that scene is so powerful that you decide that this Venice, the Venice you're seeing as a clear pencil drawing, now becomes part of your truth. It becomes a true Venice for you at that moment. And you enter in that. And I think Ophuls is absolutely brilliant example on how films work and why we enjoy them so much and why they can eventually make our life experience a little bigger. Thank you very much.